Everyone seems to be talking about bone broth lately. You hear about it everywhere, from grocery stores to podcasts, with people calling it a miracle drink. It is described as something newly discovered that can make you feel stronger, younger, and more alive. But here is the part that rarely gets mentioned. Bone broth isn't new at all. It isn't some modern invention. In fact, what we are making today might only be a faint reflection of something far older, something people were preparing thousands of years ago. What if the original version, the one that nourished kings, prophets, and ordinary people alike, was never really lost? What if it has been there all along, quietly preserved in one of the most widely read books in human history? To understand that, we have to go back far, long before supermarkets, before modern kitchens, and before anything came packaged or labeled. We must go back to a time when food wasn't just about eating, it was about meaning. Around 1,200 years before Christ, there was a man named Gideon. He was living in fear, hiding while threshing wheat in a winepress, trying not to be seen. His land had been raided for years, food was scarce, and survival was uncertain. Then, suddenly, a visitor appeared. Somehow Gideon understood that this was no ordinary encounter. So he did what people of his time instinctively knew to do in a moment like that. He prepared a meal. The Bible tells us that Gideon cooked a young goat and brought out a pot of broth thousands of years ago. Historians often point to this as one of the earliest recorded references to bone broth in human history. But if you look closely, what stands out isn't just the food itself. It is the intention behind it. Gideon didn't serve broth because it was quick or convenient. He served it because it mattered. In his world, a slow-cooked pot of broth wasn't just nourishment. It was one of the deepest forms of care. It was a way of honoring a guest and offering something meaningful. That is where our journey really begins. Today we are revisiting 5 different broths inspired by the stories, traditions, and environments described in the Bible. These aren't complicated recipes. They don't require expensive ingredients or professional skills. What they ask for is something much simpler and much harder for most of us today: patience. The first one is Gideon's goat broth, the one that started it all. Picture the setting for a moment. Ancient Israel, with its dry hills and rocky terrain. The air carries the scent of dust and wild herbs. A simple clay pot sits over an open fire. Inside, a young goat is slowly releasing its richness into water, hour after hour, as heat gently pulls everything out of the bones. Goat was one of the most common animals in that region. It wasn't considered special or luxurious. It was part of everyday life. Families relied on goats for milk, wool, and meat. When they prepared one, they used everything. Nothing was wasted. The bones, the joints, the marrow, all of it went into the pot. Along with that, they added what they had nearby. Onions, which become soft and slightly sweet when cooked slowly. Garlic, something so valued it was even found in ancient tombs. Cumin, one of the oldest spices known to humanity, mentioned directly in biblical texts. And coriander, a spice so familiar that it was used as a comparison in the description of manna. As the broth simmered over time, something remarkable happened. The bones released collagen, the marrow released minerals, and the spices blended into something warm and deeply comforting. What Gideon carried out that day wasn't just food. It was something rich, sustaining, and prepared with care. The way he offered it tells you everything about how people saw this kind of meal. It wasn't just fuel for the body, it was a gift. If you wanted to recreate something close to that today, it would be surprisingly simple. Goat bones, if you can find them, water, a halved onion, a few cloves of garlic, a pinch of cumin, a pinch of coriander, and salt. Then time, a lot of time. Let it simmer slowly over low heat. Don't rush it. That slow process is where everything happens. When it's ready, drink it warm. Not quickly, not distracted, but slowly, the way people once experienced their food. Moving from Gideon to a very different moment in history, we come to the world of Ezekiel. Ezekiel lived during a time of deep hardship. His people had been exiled, Jerusalem was under siege, and hope felt distant. Yet in the middle of this, there is a striking image described in his writings, a pot set over fire, filled with water and bones, boiling on the surface. It is symbolic, but it is also something very real. The reason that image worked is because it was familiar. People understood it immediately. Boiling bones in water wasn't unusual. It was part of daily life in that time. Broth made from lamb bones was especially common. Lamb bones are softer than beef, rich in marrow, and they produce a broth that is lighter but still nourishing. This wasn't something trendy or special. It was something practical. People who were sick drank it. Those who were exhausted relied on it. Mothers gave it to their children. Elderly men would sit with it, warming their hands around a cup. It was one of the simplest ways to restore strength. To make a version inspired by that world, you might start by roasting lamb bones first, just enough to deepen their flavor. Then, place them into simmering water. Add garlic, maybe a sprig of an herb like thyme, and then let it cook slowly over the course of an afternoon. The result isn't heavy, it is gentle, light in color, but still full of quiet nourishment. It is the kind of broth that doesn't overwhelm, but instead supports, especially when your body needs something easy. There is something powerful about that image. In a time of hardship, when everything felt uncertain, the idea of a pot slowly simmering over fire was something steady and reliable. That might be why it appears in that story at all. From there, the setting shifts again. This time, not to a quiet home or place of reflection, but to a camp of tired men. This is the world of King David. Imagine soldiers who have been walking for days across rough land. They are exhausted, hungry, and worn down. These aren't men sitting comfortably at a table. These are people surviving day by day, pushing their bodies to the limit. David understood something simple but important. A person who is cold, hungry, and drained can't function properly. They can't think clearly, they can't fight effectively, and they can't endure for long. So they made broth, not with perfect ingredients or careful measurements, but with whatever they had: goat or lamb bones, water from nearby, wild herbs gathered along the way, maybe garlic, maybe salt. Everything went into a large pot over an open fire. This kind of broth wasn't delicate. It was strong, filling, and direct. It was meant to restore energy quickly, to warm the body from the inside, and to help someone get back on their feet. There is a reason why armies throughout history relied on something like this. When the body is pushed to its limits, liquid nourishment is easier to absorb. It works faster. A bowl of broth at the end of a long, exhausting day wasn't just comforting, it was what made the next day possible. Even now, when you think about it, that idea hasn't really changed. From the harsh, demanding atmosphere of David's camp, the story begins to slow down and shift into something quieter, more intimate, and deeply human. This is where we enter the world of Elisha, a prophet known for his miracles, but also someone closely connected to the everyday struggles of ordinary people. There is a moment in the second book of Kings that often gets overlooked, but when you really sit with it, it reveals something powerful. A group of men, students learning under Elisha, are preparing a meal together. They go out into the wild, gathering herbs, doing what people had always done, relying entirely on what nature provided. But then something goes wrong. One of them unknowingly picks a plant that is bitter, even harmful, and adds it into the pot. The reaction is immediate. As soon as they taste it, they realize the broth is ruined. It is undrinkable. In a world without backups, without stocked kitchens or easy replacements, that mistake wasn't small. It meant real consequences. It meant hunger. Then Elisha steps in. He adds flour into the pot, and somehow the bitterness disappears. It feels like a miracle, and in many ways it is. But beneath that moment is something incredibly grounded. These were people trying to nourish themselves with very little, trying to make something sustaining out of simple ingredients. When things nearly failed, what they needed wasn't perfection. It was restoration. That is exactly what defines the broth connected to Elisha's world. This wasn't a broth for celebration or strength in battle. It was for healing, for people who were weak, recovering, or unable to handle heavy food. Everything about it was gentle. Lamb would likely be the base, not because it was luxurious, but because it was soft and easy on the body. The ingredients were chosen carefully, not for boldness, but for comfort. Leeks, common in that region, would bring a mild, natural sweetness. Garlic would still be there, but handled gently, crushed rather than aggressively cooked, releasing its warmth slowly instead of overpowering the broth. A small amount of cumin might be added, just enough to create a sense of warmth without heaviness. Then, there is one ingredient that feels surprising at first until you understand its history: figs. Dried figs were widely used in the ancient world, not just as food but as a form of remedy. The Bible itself records figs being used as treatment for wounds. In a broth, they would add a faint sweetness, something subtle but deeply soothing. Imagine the result for a moment: a warm, slightly sweet, incredibly soft broth. Nothing sharp, nothing overwhelming, something you don't rush but sip slowly. This is the kind of broth given to someone sitting up after days of illness, someone slowly returning to strength. Even today, that idea still holds. When the body is worn down, it doesn't crave intensity, it craves simplicity. It craves something easy to accept, something that supports rather than challenges. If you were to recreate this kind of broth, you would keep everything simple: lamb bones, water, sliced leeks, a small amount of garlic, a pinch of cumin, and a couple of dried figs. Let it simmer gently, without rushing, without forcing flavor. The goal isn't boldness. The goal is balance and quiet nourishment. From that calm, restorative setting, the story shifts once more, this time to a completely different environment. Now we are standing on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. It is early morning. The sky is still dim. The water is calm and gray, barely moving. Fishermen are finishing a long night of work. Nets are being pulled in, fish are being sorted, and there is a quiet exhaustion in the air. These are not wealthy men. These are working men, people who live by physical effort, by routine, and by the uncertainty of what each day will bring. Their hands are rough, their backs are tired, and their lives revolve around the rhythm of the sea. These are the men Jesus chose to walk alongside. Not scholars, not elites, but people who understood effort, fatigue, and the simple need for rest and nourishment. In their world, fish broth wasn't special. It was everyday life. After hours out on cold water, there was nothing more natural than a pot of something warm waiting on shore. Fish broth had one major difference from every other broth we've talked about. It was fast. While goat or lamb required hours to release their nutrients, fish gave everything quickly. Heads, spines, fins, all of it could transform into a nourishing broth in less than an hour. What it produced was something unique, light, clear, but incredibly rich in minerals and gelatin. It was the kind of nourishment that the body could absorb easily, especially when it was tired. But what truly makes this broth meaningful isn't just its efficiency, it is the moment it is connected to. In the Gospel of John, there is a scene after the resurrection where Jesus appears to his disciples on the shore. They've been fishing all night without success. They are tired, uncertain, and still trying to understand everything that has happened. When they come back, they find something waiting for them: a charcoal fire, fish laid on it, bread nearby, and a meal already prepared. No speech, no grand display, just food. There is something incredibly powerful in that simplicity. After everything, the act that remains is feeding people, offering warmth, and creating a moment of rest. That scene captures something timeless, the idea that care doesn't always come in big, dramatic forms. Sometimes it is just a simple meal shared at the right moment. That is exactly what fish broth represents. It is not complicated. It is not designed to impress. It is designed to meet a need, to warm someone who is cold, to restore someone who is tired, and to give something back quietly and effectively. If you want to make something similar, it is incredibly simple. Fish bones, especially from a mild white fish, go into a pot with cold water. Add half an onion, a few cloves of garlic, a pinch of cumin, and a few peppercorns. Bring it to a gentle simmer, never rushing it into a hard boil. Within 45 minutes to an hour, you'll have a clear, golden broth, light but deeply nourishing. You can drink it as it is or add a little lemon for brightness, something that would have been common in that region. As you drink it warm and slowly, something starts to become clear. These broths were never just about flavor. They were responses to real needs, to illness, to exhaustion, to uncertainty. Each one served a purpose beyond taste. They were practical, intentional, and deeply connected to the lives of the people who made them. Maybe that is the part we've slowly drifted away from. When you step back and look at all 5 of these broths together, something begins to connect in a way that feels almost too simple to notice at first. Gideon's broth wasn't just food, it was an offering. Ezekiel's broth wasn't just practical, it was a reflection of survival in the middle of hardship. David's broth wasn't about taste, it was about endurance. Elisha's broth carried healing and quiet restoration for those who needed to recover. And the fish broth of Galilee, the one closest to the life of Jesus, was about care in its most human form, feeding people when they were tired, cold, and unsure of what came next. None of these were created in perfect kitchens. None of them were measured, optimized, or designed for presentation. They came from real conditions, from people dealing with real challenges, using what they had, not what they wished they had. Yet, when you look at them today, there is something striking about how closely they align with what we now understand about nourishment. Slow-cooked bones releasing collagen and minerals, gentle broths supporting digestion and recovery, light, fast-extracted fish stock delivering nutrients quickly to a tired body. These weren't scientific creations, but they worked in ways we're only now beginning to fully explain. But maybe the deeper point isn't about nutrients at all. Maybe it is about something we've gradually lost without even realizing it. Somewhere along the way, food became fast. It became something we fit into our schedules instead of something that shaped them. We eat while standing, while driving, while scrolling through screens. We reach for things that are packaged, processed, and engineered to taste good instantly, but rarely designed to truly sustain us over time. In doing that, we've drifted away from the idea that food can carry meaning. The people in these stories didn't separate nourishment from intention. When Gideon brought that pot of broth, it meant something. When a pot simmered in Ezekiel's time, it meant stability in the middle of chaos. When soldiers gathered around a fire in David's camp, that broth meant survival and strength for another day. When Elisha's followers tried to fix a bitter pot, it meant hope that even mistakes could be restored. And when Jesus prepared food on the shore, it meant care without words and presence without explanation. These weren't just meals, they were moments. Maybe that is why something as simple as broth appears again and again across these stories. It represents a kind of patience that we rarely practice anymore. It represents slowing down, taking something basic, bones, water, a few herbs, and allowing time to transform it into something meaningful. There is no shortcut to that process. You can't rush it without losing something essential. The heat has to stay low, the time has to stretch out, and in that slow process, something changes, not just in the pot, but in the person making it. If you've ever stood over something that's been simmering for hours, you know that feeling. There is a quiet rhythm to it. It doesn't demand your constant attention, but it asks for your presence. It asks you to stay connected to it, even if only in small ways, checking the heat, noticing the aroma, letting the time pass without trying to speed it up. That is something we don't experience often anymore. So, maybe trying one of these broths isn't just about recreating an ancient recipe. Maybe it is about stepping back into that rhythm even briefly, choosing something that doesn't happen instantly, letting a process unfold the way it's meant to, sitting down with something warm and actually giving it your attention. Not while working, not while watching something else, just sitting, drinking, and being present with it. When you do that, something subtle starts to shift. The warmth feels different. It's not just physical, it settles deeper. There is a sense of calm that comes with it, something that's hard to explain, but easy to recognize when it happens. Maybe that's what people thousands of years ago understood without needing to put it into words. That food wasn't just about filling the body, it was about creating a moment of stillness, a pause, a kind of care that extended beyond the physical. The ingredients themselves haven't really changed. Bones are still bones, water is still water, and herbs are still growing in the ground. What's changed is how we relate to them, how quickly we move past them, and how rarely we give them the time they were always meant to have. The old ways weren't primitive, they were intentional. They didn't have modern tools, but they had an understanding of time, process, and patience. Those things shaped the way they cooked, the way they ate, and ultimately, the way they lived. So maybe sometime this week, you try it. Not all 5, just one. Pick the one that feels closest to where you are right now. If you're tired, maybe the fish broth. If you feel worn down, maybe something gentle like Elisha's. If you want something grounding and steady, maybe Gideon's. Put it on the stove. Let it simmer. Let it take longer than you're used to. And when it's ready, don't rush through it. Sit down with it. Drink it slowly. And just for a moment, do nothing else. Because in that moment, you're not just making soup, you're stepping into something that has been repeated for thousands of years. A simple act that carried people through hunger, illness, uncertainty, and everyday life. It was never complicated. It was never out of reach. It was always there. We just had to slow down long enough to remember it. If these ancient stories and recipes have changed the way you look at the simple bowl of broth on your table, please subscribe and like this channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the history and wisdom that the modern world has tried to rush past. Let us nourish the future by remembering the past. The next treasury of ancient secrets will be opened soon,